What were some of the best experiences, whether places, events, or people on your tour?
Um, the best experiences, the best experiences in any journalism project is when somebody allows you in, because you go to listen, but people are naturally on edge or uncertain, and what I found was that people really wanted to be heard. I felt that going in. I know what it's like to live in Ohio, where we often get told our story from the outside and not asked our story from the inside, and so I was very sensitive to that. But I found that people really had these stories that they wanted to tell. So one example, I went to Mansfield, and my main purpose of going to Mansfield was to visit a relatively new craft brewery, because that's another part of this trend toward craft brewers, not just as a business trend, but as a social trend. Craft brewers are very often the cornerstone in turning around a beleaguered neighborhood or a beleaguered downtown, and Mansfield certainly has a beleaguered downtown. So I went to talk to these craft brewers, and they were a great story, but while I was there, I went to talk to somebody I knew, Leyland Fowler, who manages Main Street Books. It's a little independent bookstore in downtown Mansfield. You would think that would be the worst business model ever, and yet she guts it out. And so when she told her story of why she's lived and managed bookstores in New York City, in Washington, D.C., and in Boston, and she comes back to her hometown of Mansfield. So the question is always, why? And for her, it was in part because it was home, but she said everywhere else that she had lived, she had never felt the true sense of America that she feels living and working in downtown Mansfield. She described it as Sesame Street. She leaves her apartment in the morning, she walks down the street, and everybody's in their storefront going, "Hey, Leyland, hi." And it's this really heartwarming story, but it's a struggle to do it there. Mm-hmm. And so she's not making any money. And she said the reason she does it is because she said, and she puts it better than I can paraphrase it, but she says, this is what people want to believe America is. But look at what you have to sacrifice. Look at the comfort. It's way easier to shop on Amazon and go to Walmart when you need something and operate that way than it is to go to a downtown independent bookseller in Mansfield, Ohio, and to be true to an ideal of Americanism. And yet people crave it. So what's that tension? And she explored that tension, I think, incredibly well.
Did you make any surprising discoveries? Were any of your expectations proven wrong?
From my experience in working on a book project, is you go in knowing what questions you're pursuing, and you go in knowing the direction you think you're going, but inevitably the work of writing develops a mind of its own, and it kind of tells you what it's about. And so it was nearer the end of this project that a question started to apply to everything that I did. And I didn't really think of this as the main question of the book until much later, and then when I went back and began revising, I realized this question shed light on almost everything I was writing about. And the question it's actually two questions. It's who will listen to me, and what do they want in return? And it seemed to me that that's the question of the politician, that's the question of the voter, that's the question of the citizen. It's a very human question, but it's also a very political question. And I guess what surprised me is I knew that my children were going to be part of this story. Not a main part. It's part memoir, but it's very much also a political and social analysis. But my daughter turned 18 just in time to vote in the 2016 election, an historic election for a young woman to be voting in, the first female mainstream presidential candidate versus a candidate with accusations of misogyny and just at a charged moment for any young person, but especially a young woman. My son began the Akron Police Academy, became a rookie cop, exactly in the year that's patterned in this book. So his experiences as a cop became an important part of the story. And so I was aware of them in relation to that question, who will listen to me and what do they want in return? But what I thought going in was that was the personal part of the story, and in a way they became the most political part of the story, because every question and theme and concern in this book, as it applied to them, represented it caused me to think about the future in a really personal but also sort of American kind of way. What will become of them? So there's a chapter about race, and in that chapter, I had the opportunity to ask different people, what should my son, as a young white police officer in some of the most crime-ridden neighborhoods, very black neighborhoods in Akron, what should he understand that maybe I don't know he should understand? And I had the opportunity to ask the first black mayor of Cincinnati, former mayor of Cincinnati, who had became mayor right after the historic 2001 riots following the police shooting of a young unarmed black man. What should he understand? And he was able to shed light. Was able to ask a friend of mine, a young black man from Detroit, what should he understand? It was interesting. I asked this. We were having dinner in Cleveland, and I said, what should my son, young white cop, understand? And he, without missing a beat, he said, assume I'm smarter than you. And I loved that answer because I knew what he meant, but the more I thought about what he meant, the more expansive it became. And so I guess what surprised me was how political and global my own children's stories became for me as I wrote about them.